Great to have you listening in today. As with previous seasons, it is my hope that the guests and their stories that I get to share with you this season can provide you with the tools and or insights that you need to know that you can make it through whatever is happening for you now. And not only that, that you can have the life you want in whatever way you want that to look like. So let's get to it. I'm your host, Helen Morris, and this is The Beautiful Side of Grief. I feel confident that you are going to love my guest today. We got to meet recently when he interviewed me, and I discovered he has an unbelievable story. First off, he shouldn't even be here. He has a rare genetic disease that wasn't diagnosed for years and years. I mean, seriously, he was 36 before he found out he had Muckle Wells Syndrome. He's had over 40 operations between the ages of 28 and 40. He's lost body parts. He's lost the ability to speak for 2 years. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of what he has endured medically. Having always felt he was a boy and unsure of how long he would live, he also made the decision to transition. A huge decision when you come from an LA Latino background. In between all of this, Dr. Lino Martinez got his doctorate in clinical psychology and recently became an author with his book, A Little Less Fear, that he hopes will encourage others to live with his motto of living with less fear in their lives. If this isn't enough, this human dynamo is also a playwright, screenwriter, ASL Mentor, an LGBQT plus life coach, and puts out 3 episodes a week of his podcast, A Little Less Fear, where he talks outside the box. No subject is taboo. So we are talking different forms of loss today and the grief that ensues from that. So what my intention for this episode is that you take away from this conversation the understanding that fear robs you of your happiness, and that whatever you are facing, that you can face it with a little less fear to bring more joy and happiness into your life. I also want you to be inspired to live your life authentically. Thank you for listening in today, and I'm sending loads of love your way. And a very warm welcome to the beautiful side of grief, Mr. Human Dynamo, Dr. Lino Martinez.
Helen, what an amazing introduction, and I'm so excited to be here on the beautiful side, and you're the beautiful side, by the way. I mean, our connection here is really pure, and it's out of joy and love, and I'm really, really grateful being here. Thank you so much.
I know. I feel exactly the same way, Lino. When I met you, it was just like this beautiful connection, and you just really wowed me with, some of the background of what you've been in. And so I'm really excited to share that with our listeners today, because what you've been through is more than probably most of us can even get our mind around, let alone actually live through it. I want that to be the foundation for people knowing that whatever they face, whatever they come up, actually you just need that little glimmer of light that can take you through. So let's unpack it.
Yeah, let's unpack it. There's a lot to unpack.
Okay. Yes, and it's difficult to know where to start because, you've had so much grief wrapped up in so many forms. So I thought that we'd begin with our time together by you explaining the rare genetic syndrome that you have and how that manifested for you as a youngster.
Yeah, that's an excellent way to begin. You know what? Actually, I always say, and I said this also in my book, I feel that my journey actually began in the womb because I was a breech baby and I was about 2 months early. The cord was wrapped around my neck. So I kind of made a joke about it in my book. And I said, I wanted to commit suicide in the womb because I knew that I was going to have a difficult life.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, I was barely 5 pounds. I was in the hospital for a little over a month and my mom wasn't able to bring me home. So I feel that that's actually where it all started. I didn't get enough oxygen. And from there on, I've been in hospital since I was a little baby. And and the way it actually started manifesting the disease, and I'm not really sure when the disease activated, and I put my fingers up in quotes, because it could have activated at that time when I was born. And I'm saying activated because the disease, it's caused by a mutation in a genetic variant called the NLRP3 genetic variant. And there's a lot of people living with this variant, but however, it doesn't activate with everybody. Most of the time it activates with a traumatic experience, either stresses or some type of physical experience. So I feel that it may have activated when I was in the womb. So I wasn't developing well as a child. I wasn't thriving. I was a very small, skinny little kid. I had bags under my eyes. I couldn't eat much. I couldn't gain weight. When I was, I think about 10 or 12, no, I was 12 years old. So I kept the diary when I was a little kid. I remember even writing about my struggles of gaining weight and growing. I was 54 pounds when I was 12. And that's tiny. And so even now at 43 years old, I mean, I'm barely 5 feet tall with shoes on, because honestly, without my shoes, I'm only 4'11". I really didn't get to fully thrive. And we'll talk about that, some of the struggles that I faced being a man and transitioning, being a small man and all kinds of stuff, because we're talking about grief. And I do want to explore and let you know that there's beautiful lessons that I've learned along the way. But before it became beautiful, it was very traumatic for me, emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually. I mean, in every which way you could think of.
So what stopped you from sinking into those symptoms and all that failure to thrive scenario that you were experiencing, when you were younger? What did you sort of develop some really good coping mechanisms to keep you positive, or was it really a tough struggle for you?
It was a tough struggle for me. I got picked on a lot as a kid because I was so tiny. I was the runt, I even remember my first day of third grade, and I was always on time. I was always one of the first ones in line, straight A student. And I remember I was the first one in line, and my teacher said, "Oh, honey, kindergarten is next door." And I said, "I'm in third grade." I remember. But I mean, those are things that I faced all the time. People thinking that I was a lot younger, or I was constantly having to stick up for myself. And I got bullied a lot. People wanted to fight me or even pick me up. Because, "Oh, you're so tiny. Can I pick you up?" I got that all my life. And I'm like, "Why would you want to pick me up?" Okay,
Yeah.
So, aside from that, there was some stuff that was going on too. I always felt like I was a boy growing up, but my mother, that was back in 1985, 1986, and that those things were unheard of. There's no way I could tell my Catholic parents that I was a boy or that I felt like a boy. So anytime I would rebel and try to dress like in my brother's clothes, my mother would yell at me or ground me and tell me that girls have to wear dresses and skirts, and she would always put my hair up in pigtails, and I was the most feminine girl, period.
Jesus.
And it was a nightmare for me. And so, not only was I at the time did not know that I had an active disease that activated, I was also dealing with the mental disease and distraught of being in the wrong body, the wrong gender, or now that I see it, it was actually the right gender, but I'll tell you about that in a minute.
So
But
that in itself,
that's what I went through. Yeah.
Yeah, that in itself could be just the story of your life, just enduring that alone. But to have the medical condition thrown in as well, jeepers. And was it when you transitioned that you plucked up the courage to, come out to your parents, or did you come out to them beforehand, or how did you manage that?
Yeah, actually, I didn't transition until I was 34, so I only have 9 years of being a man, if I even count the full 9 years, because as we all know, all boys go through puberty. So I went through a whole pubescent stage that took a good 4 years. So I've only really been a man in the last 5 years, I would say, because the first 4 years was getting facial hair, having a cracked voice, and I even lost my voice in between that for 2 years. So, and then, having top surgery, have my breast removed, having a hysterectomy, all kinds of other things that went with it. So, it's only been a year since my hysterectomy, so it's been a challenge. I had to grieve the fact that I didn't get to be a young boy. I didn't get to be a boy from birth to 10, or even in my teens, or even in my 20s. It was in my mid 30s when I transitioned. So there was a lot of grief that I went through of not being the boy I wish I would have been, that a lot of young guys that now have the opportunity to do, that are transitioning.
So that's still, in my eyes, is a big decision for you to make. So knowing that, as you described yourself, not really very tall and, needing shoes to be 5 foot, and then to make the decision to transition to a guy where you're probably even more susceptible to being criticized for your height, or being picked on, or made to feel not
Right.
quite, what's the right description? It's not manly, but, because I think everything about you, when I look at you, I mean, people can't see you, but when I look at you, you definitely look manly. You definitely, are not the person that you described when
Right.
I look at
Yeah.
you. But,
Thank you.
that must have been a concern for you, was it?
You know why it was not a concern for me at the time? Because when I decided to transition, I was dying from this genetic disease. By that time, I had already undergone about 30 surgeries at the time, in just between 28 and 34. And so, yeah, I knew that if I wasn't true to myself, Helen, if I didn't transition, I was gonna die, and I was gonna die young, and it was gonna be not in the right body. So it actually took me being in hospitals and being alone and being depressed and feeling like, what I used to tell people is I didn't ask to be born with this disease. The only thing I ever asked for since I was a kid was to be a boy. That's all I ever
Yeah.
wanted. I used to pray to the fairy godmother the way Geppetto did with Pinocchio. I would get on my knees and I would pray and say, "Please, fairy godmother, make me into a real boy." And I would cry myself to sleep when I was a little kid. And so I realized, you know what? I'm dying now. And I know this, I don't want to say it out loud, but I mean, when you have a feeding tube and you've lost your urinary bladder, and you have got spasms all over your body, and then you've got masses in your larynx. I mean, I knew I was not going to survive, and I thought at that moment I better transition, because this is really who I am. This is what I want to do before I die.
That is a scary, scary thing to go through. But I just love your bravery, Lino, and your conviction to be authentically true to what you felt, because you'd already been through the ringer. I mean, 30 ops at that stage. I mean, and then to subject yourself to even more, to transition, that
Hmm.
in itself is a big decision to make.
Yeah,
So
and actually that helped me, Helen, because
did it?
when I saw, wait, the only amount of surgeries I need to be myself is maybe bottom surgery, have my breast removed, and a hysterectomy. That's it, and hormones. Oh my God, what a piece of cake! Because I had already gone. I mean, losing my urinary bladder to me was one of the biggest life changing events. I mean, I've never met anybody. I've met one person, I'm sorry, that lost their urinary bladder, and he was 88 years old. And so, I mean, I was 33 when I lost my urinary bladder, and I've never met anybody my age. And it was unheard of at UCLA for anyone my age to lose their urinary bladder. And so, I mean, after losing my ability to pee, I mean, people take their body organ for granted. I mean, I went through so much pain with that, and it took me about 5 years to heal. But after going through that, I said, if I could lose my urinary bladder, I could get rid of these breasts, and hysterectomy, everything else is a piece of cake. So yeah,
I hear
and it
what you're
was.
saying about.
It was. I know if women are hearing this, I'm sorry. I know they're probably thinking that hysterectomy is not a piece of cake, but honestly, I'm
No.
speaking truthfully. After losing your bladder, it was a piece of
Yeah.
cake. It really
Yeah.
was. I
Yeah.
healed in like 6 months compared to 5 years of healing from losing your bladder. It was a piece of cake, and I would do it again.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk to us about all these operations, and the grief of knowing that you're heading to a state where you have no idea whether you're going to live or die, and you're just roller coastering from one thing to another to then put you in the situation where you made that big decision to transition. Tell us what that was like for you and what was wrapped in around that.
When I count the surgeries that I've had, they are starting from about age 28 to about really 40. Because I mean, and if I count the small little surgeries, meaning there's a lot of pelvic injections, Botox injections that I went through every 3 months, and that's all done under general anesthesia. A lot of people don't, I would say my parents, if when I'm seeing a lot of people, my parents don't include that as a surgery, because to them, when they think a surgery, they think of you're completely open, you're in operation mode. I'm like, no, because even anytime I go under general anesthesia, it's done at an outpatient hospital. There's an anesthesiologist. There's a lot of preparation involved. There's IVs. It is a surgery. And so I'm including even those injections, and everything's been done under general anesthesia. But I want to take this back even before the genetic disease activated. My very, very first surgery, big surgery, I thought, was when I was 19 years old. At 19 years old, I had a quarter of my cervix removed because they found stage 3 cancer cells caused by the HPV virus. And I was furiously pissed that it happened from being sexually active with a male, because all I ever wanted at the time before I was 19 was for my parents to accept the fact that I liked females. And they said, well, how do you know if you haven't been with a man? And then all my friends, and I started being really brainwashed by my family and my friends. Like, how do you know you like girls if you haven't been with a man? Be with a man, be with a man. So finally I was like, you know what? F everyone, I'm going to be with a man. So I had a few relationships with men, and some of them were unprotected. And next thing I know, I've got the HPV virus with stage 3 cancer at 19. So I had to have this big operation back then where they removed a quarter of my cervix, and it was very painful. I had stitches that took about 4 months to heal. I remember this and hemorrhaging, and it was just awful. And my parents didn't talk to me about it. They were angry at me. They gave me the silent treatment, and I felt shame.
Because you picked up that virus?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, how could you? Blah, blah, why didn't you use condoms and all this stuff? And I was like, oh my gosh, and I felt embarrassed. I felt disgusting. I felt ashamed. I mean, everything you could think of. And at the time, I didn't have a therapist, I didn't have a counselor, nothing. I just went through it in silence and dusted my hands off and just moved on. But that was the first operation I had at 19. And then after that, the operation started at 28.
So let's look at that, because what did that make you feel like? You were feeling shame, you were feeling like you were living in the wrong body, you feeling like you couldn't please your parents no matter which way you tried to, There were so many things that you were sort of suppressing and holding on to. How did that manifest for you in your headspace? Because until you would be able to see the difference now that you were living truly as you want to be living. Mm-hmm. So compare that time. Were you getting depressed? Were you getting anxious? How was that looking for you?
Yes, to all of it. I was very depressed. I was depressed and had a lot of suicidal ideations. What's that? Angry, depressed, suicidal. But the interesting part is, aside from being depressed and suicidal, I still managed to have some incredible hobbies. I still managed to be a straight A student. I still managed to get 4 gold medals at the Junior Olympics in martial arts. I still managed to be a singer and a mariachi singer and a lead singer for a band. I was keeping myself busy, but I was alone in my room a lot of the times when that would happen with my family, and I would cry a lot. I was always in tears. I was very depressed.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And I think it's important for people to recognize that they are feeling sadness or anger or resentment or depression or anything like that. That's a true sign that there's something really out of balance in your life, that you're not living as you meant to be living. Now, the other amazing thing about you is that you then, I don't know how you managed to do it, but you amaze me. But in amongst all of this, you managed to go ahead and get your doctorate and become a clinical psychologist.
Yeah.
How the heck did you do that? Yes, well, tell us.
So I got my bachelor's degree when I was 21 in mass communication, and I really was feeling lost at the time. I know I wanted to continue my education. I wasn't done, and I remember since the age of 5, I would tell everybody, I'm going to be a doctor one day. One day, I'm going to be a doctor. And I didn't know what kind of doctor, but I knew that was embedded in me since I was a little kid. So I knew I wanted to continue my education, but what kind of doctor was I going to be? I was intimidated by mathematics because I was dyslexic and I kept failing math. And I said, well, how am I going to get into medical school if my 12s are 21s, you know? I need to be good at math here. So I started to feel really lost and stuck. You know, well, I guess I'm not going to medical school. I guess I'm not going to be a doctor. So I decided at the time to get my master's in public health. And I was 2 years into my master's in public health. I was about to graduate, about 2 semesters away from graduating, and I dropped out. I said, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do a thesis on public health. I'm not passionate about it. I'm bored of it. And I started to I was very depressed at the time, actually, because for a lot of reasons. My parents were splitting up, and my girlfriend at the time left me for a man. And I just told her months before that I felt I was a guy inside, and she ends up breaking up with me for a man. And for people listening, I was a woman back then. So I started to feel really inadequate. Like, wow, she left me for a real boy, you know, and what do I want to do with my life? My parents aren't talking to me because I'm a lesbian. And I started to get very depressed. So I started planning my suicide. And it took me about 6 months to plan my suicide. I wanted to do it at a time when my roommate was gone. And this sounds really, really wild, but I wanted to have a clear mind when I made the decision to commit suicide. I mean, who has a clear mind when they're committing suicide? But those were my thoughts back then, you know? Yeah. So I remember the time that I had the suicide attempt. I did it with about 16 pills of codeine and drinking Gatorade. It wasn't alcohol. There was nothing else involved. It was codeine and Gatorade. And I had cleaned my room, and I wasn't spiritual back then at all. So there was no praying. There was no meditation. I just stared at myself in the mirror for a long time. And I remember thinking, hey, you're not so bad looking. Hey, you're not a bad person. But hey, you might as well. You've already taken 6 pills. Might as well keep going. But to make that long story short, that led to me being held legally with a legal hold called a 5150, which is a mandatory state hold here in the United States or California. I don't know if it's in all states, but when you have a suicide attempt, you get hospitalized for it. So I was hospitalized, and when I remember being in the hospital for the suicide attempt, I was a little angry at first. I remember even joking about it, telling the psychiatrist when he said to me, "Do you know why you're here?" And I said, "Yeah, better luck next time, huh?" And he said, "You know what? That comment is going to hold you another 3 days." And I was like, "What? Oh my gosh."
Oh.
Yeah. So I spent 6 days in this hospital, but this is what changed my life, Helen. So I was in this hospital with a bunch of people that were trying to take their lives. And I was the youngest one. I was 22 years old. And I was 24. And I was in a room with a lot of people, a lot of elderly people. There was nobody my age, not even in their 40s. Everybody was like 70 and above, and 70 to 90, and they had all tried to take their lives. And so I started, I guess you could say, interviewing them. I was going one by one. Hey, why are you here? And they were all telling me the same thing, because I want to die, because I tried to come in. They showed me the risks, and I was like, why? And every time they would all tell me, I would make me cry, and it would make me sad, and I would want to cheer them up, and I'd be like, well, maybe there's a reason for you to be alive. And they're like, why? You know, and I specifically remember this gentleman, and I don't remember his name, but I'll call him Henry. Henry was 92 years old. He was in a wheelchair, and he had slit his wrist various times. He showed me. And I asked Henry, why are you here? And he says, because I want to die. He said, my son died years ago. My wife died years ago. I used to be a millionaire. I lost everything. Tell me what my purpose is for living. And I just saw his sad, droopy blue eyes, and I had no answer for him. And I said, well, Henry, maybe there's things you haven't done. And he said, like what? And I said, art. And he goes, I'm not good at art. I said, well, let me see how not good you are. So I brought a poster board out with crayons and stuff. And then he was like, well, what are we drawing? And I said, an hourglass. And he said, okay. So we're drawing an hourglass. And he looks at me and he goes, well, why are you here? And I paused and I stared at him, and I was in this great shame to tell him why I was there, because here I am trying to encourage him to live, but I was trying to take my life at 24. And so I looked him straight in the eye, and I told him the truth. I said, Henry, because I also want to die, and I wanted to, at least. And I told him, I don't know if I do anymore. And his eyes got watery. I get sad. I get emotional talking about it. His eyes got watery, and he just looked at me, and he says, well, I hope you don't. And so from there on forward, I remember going into my hospital room thinking, I don't want to die. what are these people doing? This guy's a doctor that comes talk to me. He's called a psychiatrist and a psychologist. What do I have to do to be one of them? So I asked my psychologist, what did you do to be a psychologist? And they said, well, I got my master's in psychology and I got my PhD, blah, blah, blah. I was like, what? And I was like, well, that's what I'm going to do. So by my sixth day, at that hospital, and that suicide attempt changed me. And I got out of the hospital inspired. I went and changed my major. I got my master's in psychology and went straight to my doctorate in psychology. And that is a true story of what inspired me to get my doctorate in psychology.
That's an incredible story. I love it so much because I think what it tells us is that sometimes we have no idea why we go through the experiences we do.
Right.
But if we allow ourselves to experience them and try to understand them the best way we can, there is normally something on the other side. And whether it's just clearing out stuff or making it crystal clear, like you had that epiphany that, nope, I want to stay here. I want to help people live, like that. That is actually really, really incredible. And I love that. I really, really love that. And what was something else? What was another epiphany that you had that really impacted your life?
At the time? You mean when I got my doctorate?
Well, yeah, when you were studying or doing your doctorate or something like that. Because I always believe, sometimes I'm studying, I'm thinking, yeah. And then I'm going, oh, yeah.
So
you
actually,
have these powerful insights. Yeah.
I did. It was actually my 2 semesters before graduating with my doctorate in psychology where I think we had a sexuality class, and I decided to tell the whole class. I was like, well, we're all going to be majors in psychology here. I'm sure they're going to hear this many times. So I decided to come out in front of the class, and I said, well, I know I'm a very good-looking female, but the truth is I'm really a man inside. I know I am. I have a boy brain, a man brain. I think like a man. And I know this to be true because I've asked other lesbians questions if they feel like men, and they said they don't. So there were just a lot of things. And that was one of the biggest epiphany was at the time was don't have fear about who you are. And because now you're going to be a freaking doctor, like speak up for yourself. It's okay. And so I started coming out, and people they opened arms to me. I wasn't bullied. They were very respectful of it. And I was happy about that.
See, that's very beautiful. And that's the type of thing that you're talking about. Like every loss has a gain.
Yeah.
Like losing your femininity and transitioning to a boy, you've had so many gains from that. But even just right at that initial stage, acknowledging to people that that's what you wanted to, or that's how you saw yourself. And you identified, and then the positive response from that. So let's go into some of these other losses you've had and how you have got the gains from those.
Yeah, so let's see here. I graduated when I was 30, but the surgery started at 28. And so I was already in doctoral school at the time. And luckily, the faculty, the director, the president, they were all willing to work with me while I was in the hospital. So I was working on my dissertation in the hospital. I was taking tests in the hospitals, and at the time I didn't know the extent of pain that the next 12 years were about to that I was about to encounter. So I went through a series of some surgeries while I was in doctoral school before losing my urinary bladder. So let's go back to how I lost my bladder because I think
let's put some context in there.
Talk about how it started. I was 26 years old and I started to have difficulty peeing at the time. I couldn't pee. I would sit down. At the time I was female, and I would sit to pee. And I would have to push really hard for urine to come out. Sometimes a few drops would come out, and I didn't really understand what it was. So I saw a urologist. He did a series of tests, and he said that I had something called interstitial cystitis, which is an inflammation of my bladder lining the walls of the bladder. And he said it was so advanced. He'd never seen a case like that with anybody my age. And after a couple distensions and being in a lot of pain and things getting worse, I thought, you know what, this isn't helping me. I'm gonna let it go because I don't know what else is going on. So I let it go for 2 years. And I was getting, the school that I went to get my doctoral, where I went to the doctoral program was called the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, the Los Angeles campus. And luckily that campus was just 2 blocks away from UCLA. So one day I decided to take myself over to UCLA. I had good health insurance, and I met an incredible urologist that changed my life. That saved my life many times, like 4 times she saved my life. And when I first met her, I told her my story, and she said, well, we have to repeat the same tests and studies. So upon her doing the same tests and studies, she said, you have the same thing. You have very advanced, this disease. I've never seen it so advanced with someone your age, and your pelvic muscles are not working. Basically, they did such intense studies that they saw that my pelvic muscles were paralyzed. So that's why I would push, nothing would come out. They were just like this. They weren't moving.
Yeah.
So what happens when things become paralyzed is things atrophy. Or you've seen people in wheelchair when their legs they've been in wheelchair for years, their legs are thin, they're skinny, and that's because the body atrophies. Atrophies meaning it gets small and skinny. Mm-hmm. So because these pelvic muscles were not working and they were paralyzed, my bladder became atrophied. So by the time I saw my doctor, I was holding maybe close to about 4 ounces of liquid, and that's all it was holding, and that's not much. And that's why I had to pee all the time, and hence the muscles weren't working, so nothing was coming out. So I was in a lot of pain, a lot of distress, and I started to feel like there was no way out at that time. I was like, oh my goodness, well, what's going to happen if I can't pee ever again? This is crazy. So I became a candidate for, at the time, I mean, now the technology has changed incredible amount, but I became a candidate for something called a bladder pacemaker. And at the time it was about 4x4. It was huge. And I'm a small frame person, but I had this implanted into my lower back, and there were 6 lead wires that were connected to my sacral nerves. And what this device does is it sends electrical shocks to my pelvic muscles, to my sacral nerves. And these electric shocks go up to the brain and say empty. So and these shocks happened every 10 seconds, and I would feel it. I would be like, okay, there it is, there it is. So I was like a robot.
My goodness.
So it helped about 30% of the time, which is not drastic, but it was enough for me to have some relief. But as time went by, things just got worse. And so the first big operation that went down was my doctor. She decided to do a partial cystectomy. A full cystectomy is a complete removal of a urinary bladder. But she first did a partial cystectomy, and she did this as before a last resort. The last resort was getting your bladder removed. So this is before the last resort. And before the last resort was still a big surgery. It was an 8-hour surgery. And what she did was a C-section cut. And what she did, she got a 15 inches from my small bowel intestine, cut my native bladder, attached the new intestinal wall to my native bladder to make it bigger, and attached my urethra and everything to that. And one of the risks of that operation was that there was a chance I would never pee again, which would mean I'd have to catheterize for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And I knew that risk, but what could I do at that moment? I wasn't peeing anyway.
Right, exactly.
So I went ahead with it, which was, I think it was just short stay in the hospital, about, I think maybe a whole week, 7 days. And I went through it. And the first 2 months I was able to pee, and I was really happy. Like, oh my goodness, I could pee on my own. My God, this is great.
Yeah.
But after 2 months, I couldn't pee anymore. And so I started to have to catheterize through my urethra, and catheterizing up to 10 times a day, Helen. Wow. 10 times a day is 300 times a month. Ooh. 300 times a month for a year. Ooh. And by then, I just couldn't take it anymore. I was crying to my doctor. I said, I can't catheterize anymore. It's bleeding. It feels like blades when I'm pulling it out of my urethra. I cannot do this anymore. Will you please take my bladder out? And she was very reluctant at first. She said, you're only 32 at the time. You're so young, and a lot of things can go wrong with taking your bladder out. It's a major operation. We also have to take other organs out to do some reconstruction. And she said, let me think about it. And she said, meanwhile, I want you to have a second opinion. I said, fine. So I had a second opinion with the lead director at UCLA who had done hundreds of these worldwide, these cystectomies. Yeah. His name was Dr. Shlomo Roz, and he's already retired. But when I met him and he knew my history and my story, he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, if you were my child, I would want this for you. You've suffered way too much. And he said, so this is what's going to happen. We're going to take your entire bladder out. We're going to take your urethra out. It's no good anymore. It's been strictured. We're going to take your appendix out. And with your appendix, we will make what's called a stoma. A stoma is a hole in your stomach, and it's going to act as a conduit where you will catheterize through it. He said, we will take an additional 30 inches out of your small intestine and make a brand new neobladder out of that. We will make your ureters, your kidney tubes, shorter to connect everything together. And you will be able to live the rest of your life, a full life after that. And
just a minor surgery.
Yeah. Yeah. And at the time, I mean, there was no quality of life. There was no, I'm a doctor. There was no joy. There was none of that. At the time, I thought, you know what, I have nothing. I don't know what else to do at this point. I have to do the surgery. So it took a lot of, it took a lot of courage. Okay. A lot of courage. Yeah. And at the time I was choosing life or death, because if I didn't, I mean, I was going to die. Who lives not being able to pee? Nobody. You have to get the urine out. Yeah. So I knew that if I didn't do this, I was going to die. And so I went ahead for it. And I had a lot of family members that were there for me. I had cousins, I had friends, my parents, and the surgery was 13 and a half hours. So 13 and a half hours later, when I woke up from surgery, I just remember seeing my family member. Everybody was exhausted and tired, and they were ready to go home. Okay, we just wanted to make sure you made it alive. You made it out alive. Okay, I'm alive. But the pain, Helen, that I had when I woke up from that surgery was a pain I have never experienced in my life, not even the partial cystectomy, because so much went on. I had 3 blood transfusions. I mean, it was crazy. I was almost in the hospital for about 6 weeks, and which is not that long. I've actually interviewed some people on my podcast that have been in the hospital for months. So I'm blessed that it was only, 6 weeks. But I went home after 6 weeks with 6 tubes and an incredible amount of stitches. The incision was pretty much close to my chest all the way down to my genitalia area, long incision. Yeah. And then I had 6 tubes with all these bags all around me, and I was living alone. So I had a walker, and my mom doesn't drive far, so she couldn't visit me. I was alone. I was in pain, and I was getting depressed again. But it took 5 years, Helen, to heal from that operation. And when I say 5 years, I mean emotionally, mentally, physically, and it took about 5 years for the infections to stop. It took about 5 years for me to be able to catheterize without me being nauseous. And now it's been 9 years since that happened. It's going to be my 10th year this November. So I'm really grateful to be here. But there's been a lot more operations that happened after that. That was just the biggest one that I had.
Totally, Lino. Now let's also talk about losing your voice. That must have been a major for you as well.
Yeah. So I lost my voice 4 years ago, maybe close to 5 years ago. And I lost it for 2.5 years. And that was the disease progressing. So just to educate people, the disease that I have, Muckle Wells Syndrome, what it does is it causes inflammation in my peripheral nerves and my motor nerves. And when the inflammation is so high for too long, it causes paralysis. So because at the time I wasn't diagnosed till I was 36, and it took another 2 years to have the insurance approve me for the immunotherapy to slow down the disease. So while I was waiting for insurance to approve me, the disease kept progressing. And when it progressed to my vocal cords, I mean, I thought losing my bladder was traumatizing, but not speaking for 2.5 years was even worse for me, because I was also losing my hearing. And I was really stuck. I remember that this is actually, Helen, when my life really changed for the better, because I became spiritual at this time. I became a practicing Buddhist. And this all happened in silence because am I allowed to cuss on your, can I say a cuss word?
Yeah, you can.
I feel that my higher self said, this is the only way you're going to sit your ass down and be quiet and really tune in, by losing your voice and your hearing. But before that happened, I asked myself, I asked God, I asked angels, I said, what am I to do with my life? I went to school to be a psychologist. I need to hear them and talk to them. And now I can't do either. I have hearing aids and now I can't talk. What am I to do with my life? And it was at that time that I started having visions. And these visions, it showed me my future. You're going to have a podcast. You're going to write a book. You're going to help the deaf. I was like, I am? Well, how am I going to do all that without a voice? And I kept feeling.
Explain to us what those visions look like so we can understand. When you say visions, did you see it?
Yes,
the way that present?
The way that I could describe visions is that it's kind of like a memory of things that you haven't done yet. And so I was having these memories of what my future is going to be. And these memories, these images that I had, kind of like if you remember a dream, that's kind of how these images were, these visions. So in this imagery, in this visionary daydream, I saw myself helping deaf people with music. I saw myself hosting a podcast. I saw myself completing my book. And I was in tears at this point. And I said, okay, I see all that. I can see all that. Fine, I will start writing my book now. I can do that. But how am I going to do all that without a voice? And I heard trust. I heard the words trust. And when I say hear, I didn't hear it from my audible ear. I heard it as a thought. And the thought was trust. The thought was believe. And the thought was keep going. So lo and behold, when I became closer to my higher self and my spirituality, I met the right doctors. And these right doctors pushed for me to get on the right medications. It took a good 2 years. But when I also had laryngeal surgery. I had 3 masses in my larynx. So I had these masses removed. And it took it was a painful journey getting my voice back, because going from paralysis to non-paralysis means you have a lot of work to do in that area. So I had a lot of speech therapy, and my first year of podcasting was with one vocal cord, and it was very painful for me, very painful. But I was blessed to have one vocal cord, and I knew that I was following my life's mission by being a platform for others to speak their mind and their story. And I just kept going, but it was very painful my first year. And now I'm in my second year, and I can happily say that I'm finally thriving. I've got full control of my voice. I've got both vocal cords working at full force. And my feeding tube came out 3 months ago. So I'm thriving for the first time in my life at age 43. I know, it's incredible. It's crazy.
Have I happened to mention to you that I think you're pretty incredible?
Thank you,
Oh
Helen.
my goodness. Any one of these things that you've spoken about today would be enough to probably knock us on our butts and, not get up. So what are your tips that you can give somebody listening today who may be dealing with an extremely difficult situation that's causing deep hurt and pain? What advice do you have for them?
One of the biggest advices I can give is that failure is not fatal. A lot of the times I thought, dying, I was going to die. And to me, that's failing in life, because I always wanted to give life 100%, meaning I even said to myself, I'm going to be 100 when I die, because I give life 100%. And I thought if I die young, I failed in life. I didn't complete my mission. But I started noticing, success is not final and failure is not fatal. And you're not going to die if you fail. And so whether you have a fear honestly, everyone's got fears. Everyone has fears of all sorts. But the greatest fear is embedded in people feeling they're going to die from something, because fear comes from high cortisol levels, high stress hormones. I mean, you're really not going to die when you have fear. If anything, it's going to show you where there needs more light and where you can shine more love and where you can shine more happiness. And that is really what I've learned from all this, that the other side of grief, of losing losing who, I guess I was going to say my healthy self, but I was not healthy from the time I was born. but losing my ability to appear, losing my voice, or even losing the former gender, and even some friends that I lost. The thing that I can tell you about that is there's so much more gain from losing, and there's so much light at the end of the tunnel. You are that light. And people need to realize that there's this light inside you that keeps burning and it keeps going. And the way to find that light is to find your inner joys. If you can find one thing that brings you joy, do more of it. Because the more you do more of it, the more you're going to raise your own love for yourself, and everyone is going to see that love, and everyone's going to love you for you loving yourself. And then there, in turn, it's a domino effect. Then they want to love themselves more. It's really the most beautiful thing you could do, is to raise your joy by understanding that fears are real. What we learn in Buddhism is that fears are delusions. And if you can get rid past these delusions, you realize that your true state of mind is pure love. Remember who you are. You are pure love.
And I've said before on my podcast that, everybody is perfect exactly as they are here and now. It's no accident. You are exactly as you are, and you are meant to be here. There's nobody that doesn't deserve to be here or who is not worthy of being here. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in the expectations of living up to those expectations others have of us, or our own expectations that we have of ourselves, and we lose our way. Yet, it's exactly as you said. Find that joy within and harvest that, and allow yourself just to be happy. Really seriously, just be happy, and you get to a point where you are, because when I first met you, Lino, I would never have remotely imagined that you had been through anything like you have, because you have this beauty about you. You have this energy about you, and this light, and just all
Helen,
those
it takes
beautiful
one to know
things.
one.
But like you said, when you trust and you believe, those sound like little words, but they are huge. And the more we surrender, I think the more we allow ourselves to experience what we're truly meant to be experiencing here. I don't know
Absolutely.
about
Allow
you,
yourself to
but
surrender. Yes, there's a lot of light in surrendering. I also want people to know that you don't know who you can help by sharing your story. There's somebody that needs to hear your
yes,
story. So whoever's listening to this, everyone has their own pain, everyone has their own struggle. And if there's any way you can reach out and tell your story to somebody, yeah, you can change someone's life. Even if it's one person's life. I mean, that'll help them glow or help them feel like they're not alone or stuck. It's really worth it to open yourself up. Being vulnerable is one of the most beautiful thing you could do, because I mean, being vulnerable really comes from self-love at that point. And yeah, it comes from letting go of resistances, and it goes from letting go of shame and just saying, this is what I've gone through.
yeah,
A lot of
yeah.
the time, the suffering that we've gone through is to be able to relate to others. So yeah.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I do. And I want you to share also the relationship that you have with your parents now, because for many years it was fraught, where, you had all those struggles. So what is that like for you now?
Yeah, so the first 3 years, my parents didn't actually, when I first transitioned, they didn't really want to talk to me. They felt that their daughter had died, and they thought, their beautiful daughter is dead, and now here I am with this hairy boy. And so, and I would tell them I'm the same person. It's the same energy. It's the same energy. Physically, I look different. Yes, I'm hairy. I have a hairy chest now. I have a man's voice and a beard. Like, I understand that I'm not as beautiful as I used to be, but I'm still the same energy. And it took them a long time, but when they finally came around, they fell in love with me, and they love Lino, and I'm just really grateful that they were able to move past their old customs of being Catholic Latinos and seeing that change isn't always bad.
Oh, I love that. That is such a beautiful outcome. I love that. Yeah. Okay, so let's finish up with a couple of questions. So I ask these
Yeah.
questions in every episode. So what is the best thing that has happened to you today?
The best thing that's happened to me today is in February 27th, or
That's correct.
you know what? I'm being honest with you, sharing my story with you, Helen. I don't often share my story with many people. I was actually telling my girlfriend today that I've interviewed over 170 people, and I've only been on about 6 podcasts, and I often wonder, why don't I share my story more often? And I just feel like I'm just so stuck on making sure that other people that I'm a platform for them, and I forget to really open up and share my light. So the best thing that's happened to me today is being able to connect with you and all your listeners, And being with you right here, right now, being present in this utmost moment is the most beautiful thing that I could be experiencing right now. So thank you so much for this platform. I really appreciate you.
Oh gosh, it's an absolute privilege to have you sharing your story. And, and I can relate to what you're saying because I'm the same. It's about the
Yeah.
stories, people sharing their stories, getting it out, spreading that word and allowing people to hear what they need to hear. And we get trapped in that. And I also do very few interviews with
You
other
too.
people. Yeah. So you and
Well,
I
I'm
are very
so glad
similar in
that I
that
got to
regard.
interview you. You have a
Mm,
beautiful story. Yes, you
yeah.
definitely need to share more.
Yeah, same with you. Keep it going because
Thank you.
you are empowering so many people by sharing
Oh,
your
Helen, thank
story.
you.
So, what is something that you're most grateful for?
My life. I'm so grateful for my life. Every day I'm just so blessed. I'm grateful for the air that I breathe. I'm grateful for the voice that I have. I'm grateful for the podcast, my family members, my friends that are on the other side, the ones that have passed over. I mean, everything I'm grateful for. And I mean my cat. I'm
Yes, I just noticed your
yeah.
cat.
I'm I'm just so I just feel so much gratitude to life in general. People I meet. I mean, life is so beautiful. I tend to attract a lot of children wherever I'm at. Little kids, they see me, they point at me, they giggle, and those little moments just fill me with so much love and light and keep me going. And I'm really blessed to be here. I mean, I can't wait to keep going, and that's really been my motto. Keep
Wow.
going.
Wow, that's incredible. I love that. And when you're having moments in your day that turn to custard, what is your go to?
Yeah, my go-to on my days turn to. I love custard, by the way.
Yeah.
So we might have to change that.
I know, but it's a different kind of custard. Things don't go so well.
When I have a bad day,
Yes.
when I have a bad day, which does happen. I mean, it happens often. It's gonna happen. The ups and downs or the ebb and flow in life. I realize when that happens, I have to ground myself either by meditation or even taking a nap. A lot of the times, taking a nap helps me tremendously, just to relax my nerves and even tell my nerves it's okay for you to relax right now, to rejuvenate and to renew yourself. Whether that's 30 minutes or 45 minutes, a nap always helps. And or calling someone that inspires me. Yeah, napping, meditation, praying. I love the connection. I love yoga. I do yoga every day.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hope that helps.
Cool. So, anybody who is wanting to get hold of your book, A Little Less Fear, which goes into your story in so much more depth and is really inspirational for people to read, to find out more about you, to find out more about your podcast, just a brilliant person that you are, how can they do that?
Thank you. You can get all of that information on my website at www.alittlelessfear.com. And that's also the same handle for Instagram, Little Less Fear. Actually, it's A Little Less Fear podcast on Instagram. On TikTok, it's A Little Less Fear. On LinkedIn, it's A Little Less Fear. On YouTube, it's A Little Less Fear.
There's a bit of a theme happening here.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Or you can go on Amazon and get the book there as well.
Yeah, and we're going to have all those links in the episode notes anyway.
Thank you.
So anybody that didn't pick up A Little Less Fear
Yeah, exactly.
as the main theme of getting hold of you on social media can do so by the episode notes. Lino, gosh, what an absolute pleasure it is to speak to you today, to have you share your story. Any final thoughts that you would like to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, the actual final thought I want to leave it with is that a lot of your experiences can help someone. And just I know we're out of time, but I just wanted to share this. So recently, meaning just a few months ago, my brother struggled through laryngeal cancer and he had a complete laryngectomy, which means he will never talk again. So now that my brother has no voice, I can see now that me losing my voice was to help not only other people, but even my own immediate family member, my brother. And he is struggling right now with the awful realization that he will never speak again. And I see him struggling and in pain. And the only thing I can say is I did get my voice back for a reason, and now I can see that I can be a voice for him, and I'm honored to be a voice for my brother. So that's why I really want people to know that a lot of your suffering that you go through can be to help someone else and to relate with someone else and help someone else. So don't underestimate some of the suffering that you've gone through. And also, one last thing, remember too that just because you're suffering doesn't mean you have to be in pain, and just because you're in pain doesn't mean you have to be suffering.
Oh, those final thoughts are just absolutely brilliant, and I'm so sorry to hear about your brother. I mean, that is a huge journey for him, and I agree 100%. You having experienced that yourself really allows you to understand what it is he's going through now, and that is going to be a huge help to him once he's able to get himself into that place of accepting where he is.
Exactly.
And even you getting him to that place. So, Lino, oh my gosh, this was so much more than I expected, and I am so grateful to you for
I'm
everything
grateful
that
to you,
you've been
Helen.
through, for coming out the other side of it so brilliantly, and for sharing it with us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. It was a very beautiful experience. Thank you, Helen.
Thanks for listening. I hope you got some real value from this episode. Let me know how I'm doing, or if there's a topic you'd like covered, by clicking on the Healing to Be You Gmail link, or going to the Healing to Be You website. To get notified of new episodes, hit the subscribe button, and please share if you know of someone who could benefit from this episode. Until next time, be kind to you and take good care.